You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We have our next guest, Deborah Weiss, is on with us. Deborah Weiss is an attorney, an author, public speaker on national security-related issues. She's considered an expert in the defamation of religions resolutions, which are promoted by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in the United Nations. Previously, she was the Manhattan director for the Forbes for President campaign, served as a counsel for the Committee on the House Oversight in Congress, and worked as an assistant corporation counsel in the Giuliani administration. She has contributed to a book, a contributing author to Saudi Arabia and the Global Islamic Terrorist Network, and she's the primary researcher for a book entitled Council on American Islamic Relations, Its Use of Lawfare and the Intimidation, which is published by Citizens for National Security, which is being released today. She is also a regular contributor to the Washington Times and Front Page Magazine and numerous other publications. And by the way, Ms. Weiss is also a survivor of the 9/11 terrorist attack in New York City. And now Deborah Weiss is a guest with Brett and John on the Final Say Radio Show. Deborah, first of all, congratulations on all the work that you've done here, and welcome to the program. Hi, Debbie. Deborah, this is very interesting, and some of our audience may be familiar with, but I'd like to introduce the Organization of Islamic Cooperation in the UN. Please tell us about it and why we should be concerned.
The Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC, is actually the largest voting bloc in the UN, and most people have never heard of it. It consists of 56 Muslim-majority member states. Oh, my God, I'm getting terrible feedback. All right, I'll go down here, try a different room. Anyway, it consists of 56 UN member states plus the Palestinian Authority, and they have an absolute stranglehold over the Human Rights Council, and they've been pushing for years UN resolutions that, if made binding law, would have the effect of stifling all criticism of any Islam-related topic, even if it's true. For example, if you wanted to talk about Islamic terrorism, you wouldn't be able to. If you wanted to talk about Islamic persecution of religious minorities, you wouldn't be able to, and so forth.
No, it's very yes, I'm here. No, it's very, very interesting. And look, I gotta just for the record, and my listening audience understands this, I am probably the least fan of the United Nations. I actually think that at this point it's a useless organization and we should pull out of it, because I believe it's given voice to so many rogue and renegade states, and in fact, in a sense, it gives, when you could allow the enemies and terrorist nations that we've been fighting a war against for decades now to come into New York City and speak of the vulgar ways and the things that they do, but then when they set up these organizations, Deborah, and they covertly try to infiltrate so many parts of our nation and in promoting something in disguise, if you will. And I know you could tell us so much about this.
Well, this organization, first of all, unfortunately, we have not been fighting them under this administration. We've been working very closely with them,
that's true.
often to the detriment of Israel. They're all extremely anti-Israel, and one of their missions is to support the quote-unquote Palestinian struggle. So, and they don't have to infiltrate. All they need is alliances to legitimize them, and I agree with you, they should not be legitimized. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the UN resolutions, though. UN resolutions are not legally binding, but they have a lot of political clout. So if a resolution is passed repeatedly or in various different bodies, the ideas in those resolutions contain political weight. So the resolutions that they keep passing are called defamation of religions, and it's important to understand this concept. They started this push in 1999, and originally, I don't think people in the West understood what the OIC meant when they used that word, because in America, we have laws against defamation now. And it took us a while to realize that our defamation laws are very different than the defamation laws that exist in the OIC countries. In America and in the West, you can only defame a person, but ideas, policies, and religions are not protected from criticism. So what the OIC was asking for was for religion to get defamation protection. In other words, legal protection from being criticized. And even though the resolutions were framed in a way where it was saying it would protect all religions, the OIC's definition really only included Islam. And even if it did, by the way, include all religions equally, I would still be against it because it's a speech-stifling measure. And that's,
exactly.
Freedom of speech is a fundamental freedom, and if you can't talk about certain things, it has all kinds of other consequences that I really don't have time to go into in the short period of time that I'm allotted. But the U.S. at a certain point did realize that these resolutions had potentially grave consequences for freedom of speech, so they tried to educate delegates to vote against this resolution. And basically that's how the votes lined up. The OIC countries voted for it, and the free countries voted against it. So under this administration in 2011, Hillary Clinton did ask the OIC to draft an alternative resolution with the stated goal of retaining free speech and addressing the OIC's concerns about alleged Islamophobia. And the new resolution, I don't know if anyone in your audience has heard of it. It's now rather infamous or famous, depending on your viewpoint. Resolution 1618, as it's called. It's Resolution 1618 to combat intolerance based on religion or belief. And we in the West initially thought that this was a landmark shift from the OIC, moving from protecting an idea or religion from criticism to protecting religious minorities, and that's why we supported it. But as things turned out, the devil is in the details, and line by line, they somehow managed to cling on to their original goal of protecting Islam from criticism by using interpretations of language in the text that would still wind up with the same result. And, as if that weren't bad enough, we should have just left it alone because, as I said, UN resolutions are not legally binding. But this administration chose in 2011 to hold an international conference to implement the resolution, and this is pretty much unprecedented. It is not the norm. So 30 international organizations and countries attended with the purpose of trying to find ways that they could implement the resolution. And I don't know what happened between March of 2011 when the resolution was passed and December 2011 when they held the conference to implement it, but somehow that original goal of retaining free speech got completely lost, and the interpretation of the resolution that this administration worked to implement was the speech-stifling interpretation. So, fortunately, America still does not have hate speech laws. Europe is lost on this, by the way. Every single European country has some form of hate speech law using different words. Sometimes it's called hate speech. Sometimes it's called defamation of religion. Sometimes it's called vilification of religion or denigration of religion. There's all kinds of names for it. But if a Muslim organization, for example, files some kind of complaint because of something you said and you're found liable, you will get prosecuted and penalized, not criminally necessarily the way they do in the OIC countries, but civilly. So you'll get a fine. Sometimes you will be criminally prosecuted. In the Netherlands, unfortunately, we're now to the point where they're criminally prosecuting people in a non-Muslim, supposedly free country. So America is literally the last country in the West that truly has free speech, and I'm trying to raise awareness so that we can keep it because there is a push by Islamist organizations of which the OIC is only one, to have our speech stifled. And it will have all kinds of ramifications for national security, for religious freedom, and for human rights. So I'm trying to raise awareness so that people in the audience, whether they're individuals or churchgoers or elected officials or work for government agencies, are vigilant and recognizing what is going on, why it's going on, and what they can do to stop it.
Debbie, your work is so profoundly important, and I'll give you a perfect example why. We had many of the things that we've discussed over our few weeks traveling in Israel together. I've already seen firsthand the last 2 weeks. Brett and I have been with a lot of folks, especially from the intelligence, both civilian and defense intelligence. There's actually purges going on, as you know, painfully well, within our organizations, both from the documentation and the use of words, as well as from the actual people who have their finger closest to the pulse of who our real enemies are. So the question I have for you is, when you do this study, and you're spending a lot of very important time looking at it from a standpoint of the legal perspective, but where are you finding the common denominators for the funding sources behind it, and and let's just call them the complicitous ones within our own government who are helping to allow?
I didn't get the second part. I'm sorry.
There are people in our government who are obviously complicitous. They have the awareness. So there's a funding source issue, but then there's people in our government. Funding has to go somewhere. So that means somebody is complicitous in our government with accepting accepting money and allowing this to come across.
If I might, for those in the audience who aren't sure what you were referring to, thank you for bringing that up. It is absolutely true that starting in 2011, in a variety of agencies, this government has completely rewritten all their training material for national security and counterterrorism programs. Unfortunately, it's a bipartisan problem because it started in 2008 under Bush, where they issued memos to their national security and intelligence professionals, asking them not to use words like jihad or Islamic terrorism. But under this administration, it has gotten undoubtedly worse, where they've actually rewritten the training, and people who are supposed to be trained in counterterrorism are not learning about Islamic terrorism, because to this administration, if you use that word, you're an Islamophobe. So it's very important to understand that in the West, we might equate Islamophobia with bigotry or prejudice, but the OIC uses that definition in a very different way to mean anyone who says something negative about Islam, even if it's true. So the funding sources are, first of all, there is a common thread. I say Islamist. I'm not saying it's all Muslims, and I'm not saying it's every Islamic group. I know Zuhdi Jasser runs a really great Islamic group that is not involved in this and, in fact, opposes this. But the groups that do believe in this do work together, and even when they don't, they have the common goal of cleansing the lexicon from our language one way or the other. So it's all the Muslim Brotherhood front groups like CARE, which is the book that that's being released today that I worked on, CARE, Islamic Society for North America, Islamic Circle of North America, Muslim Students Association, all of the tentacles that come out of the Muslim Brotherhood and have manifested themselves in 501c3s in this country, work toward this goal. That's where the money is going. So I answered the second part first, I suppose. And the funding source is largely Saudi Arabia, which is the largest exporter of Wahhabi ideology that we have. The OIC is largely driven by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is its largest funder, and it also takes direction from Iran, Pakistan, and Egypt. And in this country, by the way, I did want to add that what I was saying is legally we still have free speech. But on a policy level, this government has limited speech and cleansed it within government agencies. So certainly you can say what you want when you're out in the public. A lot of people censor themselves, and now I believe that there is some kind of pressure from others for you to censor yourself. And this administration, Hillary Clinton even said that we're not going to advocate for hate speech laws, but that the U.S. advocates for other measures that will achieve the same results. So she's basically telling us that their goal is to shut you up, and she said the techniques she'd use is peer pressure and shaming, that the goal is to shut you up, but not by law, but by peer pressure, shaming, and policies.
Spot on. You use the word self-censorship. I'll just point out very quickly, you have John Kerry and our president who right now are trying to refer to Iran and make a ridiculous suicide deal under the guise of moderation or thinking they're moderates, while at the same time the Ayatollah is still using his word, annihilation of Israel. I don't know any other way to describe annihilation but the complete and utter destruction of a people, a place, or a thing. Really, really tough. Now, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to ask you a very important question. It's such a complex subject. What are simple steps average people who still care about this country can do to help stem the tide?
Well, first of all, educate yourself so you know what's going on. Educate yourselves, your family, your neighbors, your friends. It's very important. I absolutely believe that when you go to vote, this should be a litmus test. Ask your officials, whether they're on a local level or a federal level, do you believe in free speech? Do you believe in it even if somebody finds it offensive? Do you believe there's such a thing as Islamic terrorism? That's a concern for national security. If they don't believe in it, they're not going to do anything about it, are they? So I would use litmus tests, and I would get involved. Boy, do I have terrible feedback. Get on your school board, because some of these groups, not the OIC, but other groups, are rewriting children's textbooks. They're brainwashing your children. Know what your children are being taught. Be involved. And last, get involved in your church. Stop participating in those interfaith dialogues, because those panels are largely for the purpose of disseminating propaganda and disinformation. If they want to have an interfaith dialogue in Saudi Arabia, guess what? I'll be all for it. But the way they do it here is just to give disinformation to the public so that they don't know what is going on.
All excellent points. Deborah Weiss, first of all, it's been a pleasure having you join us on our program, and we really enjoyed speaking with you so much on our trip to Israel, and we've learned so much from you, which is why we asked you to come on the program. And so I just want to ask you real quick, because we've got to let you go, unfortunately, but where could people find the new books that is coming out entitled Council on American Islamic Relations?
The new book is published by Citizens for National Security, and if you just Google Citizens for National Security, there's a link to the book, and you can order it directly from them. And if you want to find more of my articles, you can just Google my name, DeborahWeiss, and Islam, or go to my website, which actually has a very small fraction of my articles because it's not updated, but it's www.vigilancenow.org.
Excellent. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we are going to ask you to come back because there's so many other issues to discuss with you in this area, and even continue this discussion we had today. So thank you, and congratulations on the research and the work that you did in the new book.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, take care. Again, Deborah Weiss does great work on these national security related issues, and the big area here is defamation of religious resolutions.